Trevor says, you guys think the coaching staff is playing at motivation game with Mincy to try to get him to step up this whole season? In my opinion, comes down to the O-line. They really need Mincy to step up. Yes, and yes, and yes. And I'm going to address that more, Trevor, a little bit later in the program. I think they flipped Mincy over to back and forth on tackles in the first week to try to get his attention. That guy has the physical ability that really nobody else on the team has, and maybe the closest to Darnell Wright. He's got to flip the switch. The two guys that need to flip the switch, Mincy immediately, Addison Nichols this year. He needs to be ready for next year. On the offensive line, those two guys have to flip the switch.
Yeah, and it's shocking that they haven't. And this is I would like to say it's for motivation, but I'm going to kind of disagree with you, Dave. I don't think Mincy has gotten where he needs to go, so I think they don't trust him as a starter. Look, I don't think Mincy is that mentally tough. I'm just going to say that. I don't think he's that mentally tough, and I think you got to be mentally tough to play offensive line. Gerald Mincy is not going to he's not going to projectile vomit and point at an edge rusher. He's never going to do that.
No, fair. Let's change things up a little bit and go ahead and get to some practice notes, as Mincy is one of the players we were just talking about. So Mincy has to flip that switch. I think he's the most talented player. Do I think he'll do so based on people I talked to? Completely unknown. Within the program, just completely unknown. Is he going to flip the switch or not? Have no idea quite often. So some more practice notes as we're at midway of camp. And that's Ollie Lane. He's the heir apparent to fill in for Cooper Mays, who underwent that medical procedure. Ollie Lane is not an incredibly talented player, but I do believe, because he's been around the program and he's been there the entire time that Josh Heupel has, I do believe that Ollie Lane knows the offense, and that means something right then and there. So he can handle the line calls, I think, with great confidence. After that, it gets a little weird. Okay. So I'm not sure if he is a guy, Caleb, that can go out there and dominate. I know he's a big cat. So is Dane Davis, who's like 6'7" at center. They tried him there last week, but I just don't know that Ollie Lane can go out there and use leverage the way Cooper Mays did. And as a matter of fact, if I had a bet, I would say no. I don't think that Ollie Lane, if Cooper Mays was a 10, then Ollie Lane at best is going to be a 6.5.
Well, that is a relief, though, to hear if you're a Tennessee fan, if Ollie Lane can handle the calls, because that's the biggest. Look, the reason the center's the reason it comes down to center or left tackle for most important position. One's the blind side tackle. But with center, it's because they handle the calls. If it wasn't for handling the calls, the center wouldn't probably be a top 3 blocker on the line. I mean, you would probably have. So blocking ability is not as important, funny enough, as handling the calls. It's kind of like a point guard in the NBA. You don't need your point guard. Your point guard could be your worst scorer on the team. Doesn't matter, as long as they can handle the offense and run the show. And so if it's true that Ollie Lane can handle the calls, and if he can snap the ball accurately, not snap it over Joe Milton's head or below Joe Milton. If he can just do those two things, I think you can work around his lack of ability to get leverage blocking. Yes, it's drop off. You would rather have Cooper Mays, but that's easier to work around than it is working around a center who can't make the calls.
Yeah, and when the guard yells, Ollie, he has to make sure and get the call out, which is oxen free. You get that?
Yeah, I get it.
Totally lame. All right, another practice note up, and this is on offthehooksports.com. Upgraded defense up front, not just upgraded in terms of talent, because the Vols obviously lost Byron Young, who I believe was their most talented player up front last year. But we mentioned Jeremy Banks. When I say up front, I mean the top basically 6 and or 7, if you want to count the nickelback in that regard. But
great band.
But what?
I'm sorry. I'm just going to say great band every time you say Nickelback.
Nickelback, yes. I would say that Tennessee as a whole is better on the defensive front. You need to see a Tyler Barron step up, like you mentioned, and we'll see if that can happen, if he can be like a Byron Young. But I think Tennessee is much, much deeper. Like, maybe they felt comfortable with Oh my gosh. And their defensive front felt comfortable with 8 to 10 players last year. I think they feel comfortable in the defensive front. Again, the front 6 or 7, depending on how you want to look at it, with about 12 to 14. So then wide open, another practice note. The Vols are stronger at receiver than tight end. Don't be surprised if they run a lot more 4 wide, Caleb. But that doesn't mean bad things for Jacob Warren, who could line up as a tight end playing receiver. So he would be outside the box. So technically he would be a receiver. Don't be surprised that if that happens. Arion Carter's good, really good. And I asked this question because he was on a list of best incoming player. And we're like, what about Dante Thornton? What about John Campbell? What about all these guys that are transfers and have college experience? I was on that. I was told Arion Carter is crazy special. He goes by AC now, which I think was the helicopter pilot in Magnum PI. Caleb, I think that Arion Carter is going to be one of the top freshmen in the SEC.
Yeah, I've been hearing this about him since the spring, and I've been high on him. If you remember last year covering recruiting, this was Tennessee's biggest get. This was the one they had to have above anybody else. And no, I think he's a huge get for Tennessee. Look, I've been talking about this, and we talked about it with Josh last week. I still think you could run a standard base 4-3. And yeah, you might be a little bit shorthanded when it comes to offenses spreading the ball, but so what? Would you rather have a mediocre nickelback trying to guard a third receiver, or would you rather just go with the base 4-3 where you could have 3 linebackers making an impact in the rushing the passer? I mean, that's something you might want to consider.
From who I talked to, it would be a big schematic difference. Not to just poo-poo your idea there, but it would be a big schematic difference. Carter would essentially have to learn how to play a nickelback position. He's athletic enough, I believe, to cover a lot of slot receivers. But really, these guys are all taught the mechanics and technique to play Mike linebacker. They're really, even though there are 2 guys, based off who I talked to, talking about scheme within the program, that you're talking about basically everybody's taught how to play Mike linebacker. And you're really almost playing 2 Mike linebackers, which was interesting to me because it's not like the strong side where you're on the tight end, or it's the weak side where you're not. And it's not like the boundary side or the field side where you're on the wide side of the field. I found that to be pretty interesting, but everybody's pretty much taught to play what is essentially a Mike middle linebacker role. So that was surprising to me, something that I dug up over the weekends. I don't know that he could make that transition schematically, but I think he could certainly make it physically. Now, Steve Spurrier says what we all know about the NIL. Bidding wars are happening. I can tell you, this is fantastic for the Vols because right now they're ranking with the very best NIL teams in the country, and they might be the best. So Steve Spurrier says it's all a bidding war. Can I get a big I mean, is that surprise anyone, Caleb?
No, but this is why we all love Steve Spurrier, because Steve Spurrier says the obvious thing that every coach also wants to pretend isn't true. Because he was asked this on Open Mic with Mike Bianchi, and what he said was, and I can't do a Spurrier impression, so I'm not going to, but he said how he would have handled NIL today if he were still coaching. And he said, literally, I would have probably tried to do it like all these guys are doing it now. You find some wealthy guys that sort of have more money than they know what to do with, and then you can try to match what the other schools are offering them. And he just said it because every coach is trying to pretend, no, we're just, we're recruiting the best players and they want to come here because they love the university. And then they get the NIL money to that for endorsements. But, we have integrity, and money has nothing to do with these players choosing the university. This is why we love Spurrier.
Let me tell you how this is playing out. Okay, so it's as simple as this. And we had a question from Top Troop, that transfer wide receiver from Oregon. Do you think he could be Jalen Hyatt but taller? Yes, I do think he could. But Jalen Hyatt, in all fairness to him, was faster than he was at the combine and has clocked one of the top speeds in the history of the NFL and the history of man. So maybe we sold Jalen Hyatt a little bit short, calling him a system player. Maybe a little bit short. I thought he was
a lot short. I got to be honest. I having watched it, the fact that he can do these little the tippy toe catches, which he never did in college. We never saw him do that in college.
Never had to.
Yeah, never had to. Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the Hendon Hooker point. He's like, it's not my fault. My receivers are always open. And it's
very true.